Amanda, with only $5, is sent to buy food. Instead, she stumbles upon a flyer for a storage auction. Her impulsive decision to attend changes her life. Amanda sat in the corner of the dilapidated shelter, her head resting against the cold wall as she watched her mother, Jane, doze off on the worn-out mattress beside her. They had no home, no food, and only $5 to their name. Jane had given Amanda the money to buy something to eat, but as Amanda sat on the cold curb, her stomach twisted in hunger, unsure of where to go next. With no other option, Amanda wandered the streets of New York, the weight of her family's struggles pressing down on her. It was then she stumbled upon a sign advertising a local storage auction, a place she'd never heard of before, but where, without thinking, she decided to go. It was just another attempt to kill time. In less than an hour, Amanda, not really intending to bid, found her hand raised on impulse. She won the auction for a Millionaire'S warehouse, an abandoned space once owned by the elusive billionaire Bill. As Amanda and Jane stepped inside, they had no idea that what lay within, hidden behind a false wall, would change their lives forever. What they found would be worth millions, treasures that nobody had expected, and that would test their courage in ways they could never imagine. Amanda shuffled along the cracked pavement, her tiny feet slipping in the worn sneakers that had seen better days. The cold of the New York morning bit at her skin, but it was the hunger gnawing at her stomach that hurt the most. She didn't complain, though. Complaining wouldn't change anything. It never did. Her mother, Jane, was somewhere behind her, trying to keep up with her slow pace while balancing a plastic bag full of old clothes that had been donated to them from a nearby shelter. Amanda could hear the strain in her mother's voice as she tried to calm herself, but she didn't need to see her face to know that Jane was struggling too. She could feel it in the way her mom moved, slower than usual, her body hunched with the weight of carrying more than just a bag. "Keep up, sweetie," Jane called softly, and Amanda turned, offering a faint smile. They had been walking for hours, looking for a place to get a warm meal or even just a little peace, but New York had little mercy for people like them. They passed the homeless shelters, where Amanda and Jane had stayed the past few nights. The constant shuffle of people, the harsh voices, the noise, it was all the same. The shelters were full, and the ones that weren't had strict rules. No one cared that they were just a mother and daughter trying to survive. They were just another number in a city that had no room for them. Today, Jane had given Amanda their last $5 to buy food, but the truth was, Amanda knew that the money wouldn't go far. $5 barely bought enough for a single meal for the two of them, let alone any hope for a better life. They needed more than food. They needed a place to stay, a way out, but Jane kept going, kept doing what she could, even when her own spirit was nearly broken. Amanda knew her mother tried to hide her exhaustion, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She'd seen the way Jane's eyes would get cloudy, her shoulders drooping like a flower too long without water. "Amanda, honey, wait here. I'll be right back," Jane said, turning down an alleyway. Amanda paused, leaning against a nearby wall, staring at the worn-down brick buildings that surrounded them. Her mind wandered to thoughts of other kids she saw at school, kids who had their own beds, who never went to bed hungry. Her chest tightened as she wondered what it would be like to be one of them, just a regular kid. It felt like forever before Jane returned, her eyes hollow, holding two half-stale rolls from a bakery that had thrown them out. Amanda didn't care how they tasted. They were food, and in this city, that was enough. Jane sat beside her, biting her lip as she handed Amanda one of the rolls. The world outside was cold, but at least they had each other. Amanda took the bread from her mother, savoring it as best as she could. They had no plan, no future. And yet, just for a moment, they shared a quiet connection. Their bond, the only thing that felt unbreakable in the chaos of their lives. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot as Amanda and Jane made their way to the riverside storage facility. Amanda's stomach growled again, a reminder that there was still no food in sight. Jane didn't say much, but Amanda could see the way her mother's eyes darted around, calculating, always calculating, how much longer they could stay in the shelter, how far they could stretch the last of their money. "Just for a little while," Jane said, giving Amanda a tired smile as they stepped through the open gates. "Let's look around. Maybe there's a warm place inside." The auction wasn't much more than a distraction, a way to pass the time before they had to face the streets again. Jane had found the flyer the day before, offering a public storage auction with a promise of treasure inside old, abandoned units. They had no intention of bidding. Amanda didn't even know what an auction really was, except that people seemed to raise their hands and shout prices. But she followed her mother, hoping for something to break the monotony of their desperate existence. Inside the warehouse, the crowd was small, mostly older people, a few younger couples, some with weary eyes like Jane. They found seats near the back, tucked away in a corner where they could escape notice. Amanda took in the rows of metal storage units lined up in neat rows. There was nothing glamorous about it. Just old doors, locked tight, hiding the remnants of people's forgotten lives. The auctioneer was an older man with a wide-brimmed cowboy hat and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shuffled papers on the podium, talking about the rules of the auction. Amanda could barely follow his words, but she caught the part where he mentioned cash only and no refunds. Jane leaned in close, whispering in Amanda's ear, "We're just here to watch, okay? This isn't for us." Amanda nodded, her eyes wandering over the boxes and crates that sat behind the rusted doors. She tried to imagine what might be inside. Old clothes, maybe some furniture, but probably just junk. It was all too far beyond their reach. She felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle into her chest. The first few units came and went without much excitement. One was filled with old furniture that sold for a measly $75. Another contained a stack of boxes of unsold sports equipment, fetching $120. The people around them murmured, some shaking their heads, others nodding with faint interest. The price never seemed worth the effort. Then, the auctioneer announced Unit 217. The room quieted, the air thickening with anticipation. Amanda glanced up at Jane, who was staring at the unit, her eyes narrowing. The auctioneer made a big show of the history behind the unit, a billionaire's belongings, paid for in advance but now abandoned. "Anyone interested?" he asked, glancing around the room. Amanda barely heard the numbers start to drop. She wasn't even thinking about it, her mind drifting as she watched the others glance at each other. She heard the bid hit $200. Silence. Then $150. Still nothing. The auctioneer looked around, waiting for someone to make a move. $27, he said, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. Amanda didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was the way the crowd seemed to shrink back, or the way the price had dropped so low. Maybe it was the thrill of the moment, the idea that something could be different, something could change. Before she could stop herself, her hand shot up. The auctioneer blinked. "Do I hear 30? The room fell silent, and Amanda's heart thudded loudly in her chest. For a moment, she wished she could pull her hand down, but it was too late. The auctioneer stared at her, surprised, then gave a nod. "Sold! To the young lady in the back for $27. Amanda froze. Her mind raced as the crowd turned to look at her. She could feel the weight of their stares, the laughter, the surprise. Jane's face went pale. The auctioneer handed her the key, still smiling, but there was no joy in it. Amanda looked at her mother, who was now shaking her head in disbelief. But Jane didn't say anything. She just put her arm around Amanda's shoulders and led her toward the exit. They had just bought a Millionaire'S forgotten warehouse for the price of a lunch. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the moment everything would change. The air inside the warehouse smelled old, like dust and forgotten things. Amanda turned the key in the heavy lock of the storage unit, her hands trembling, though she wasn't sure why. This was just a room full of old things, nothing special. It had to be. That's what everyone else had thought when they looked at the unit, right? She rolled the metal door up, and the clang of it echoed off the empty walls. At first, it seemed exactly what she'd expected. A jumble of boxes stacked haphazardly, some old furniture pushed against the wall. But there was something unsettling about the place, something that made Amanda's skin prickle. It looked like a million other abandoned storage units she had seen online in the shows her mother sometimes watched, with stories of old antiques and forgotten treasures. "See, I told you it would be nothing," Jane murmured, standing in the doorway. Her voice was tired, but there was a trace of amusement in it too. They'd spent $27 on a whim, just to pass the time. They were here for something to do, a little distraction from their daily struggle. Jane leaned in the doorway, her arms crossed, looking like she wanted to leave already. Amanda wandered further into the unit, stepping over a pile of cardboard boxes and worn-out furniture. It all seemed unimportant, scraps from someone's old life. The dim light filtering in from the hallway wasn't enough to make much sense of the mess. She moved a few boxes, then stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't much, but there, behind a stack of dusty plastic bins, something caught her eye, a slight gap in the wall. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. At first, she thought it was just another crack, but then she saw it, a panel, hidden behind everything else, as if someone had deliberately placed it there, waiting for someone to find it. "Amanda." Jane's voice pulled her out of her daze. Ignoring her mother's call, Amanda's fingers found the edge of the panel. It was cool to the touch, smooth, almost too new compared to the rest of the room. With a small grunt, she pressed against it, and the panel shifted. The sound of it moving was a small but undeniable invitation to something more. Her eyes widened as she peered into the hidden compartment. Inside were neatly stacked crates, metal and wooden, secured with thick tape. Each one was carefully labeled, almost as if the person who had stored them had meant for someone to discover them, someone who knew what they were looking at. Amanda hesitated, then pulled one of the crates out. It felt heavier than it looked. The first box she opened was filled with leather-bound journals. She carefully turned the pages, but the scribbles inside were far beyond anything she could understand. There were drawings and diagrams, lines of dense, technical writing that made no sense to her at all. She set it aside, her heart racing. The next crate contained more, sleek, metallic objects wrapped in cloth. They were nothing like the outdated gadgets she'd seen before. These were small, compact, and definitely not junk. Some were delicate, almost too delicate to touch. Amanda placed them back in their crates, carefully stacking the boxes to examine later. The last box was the one that really took her breath away. It was filled with encrypted hard drives, each one labeled with cryptic codes and dates. Amanda didn't know what they were, but they looked important. Her fingers trembled as she set them aside, trying not to let the magnitude of it all overwhelm her. This can't be real," she whispered under her breath. Jane walked over, her face drawn in confusion, and then her eyes caught the sight of the hidden compartment. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, frozen as the weight of what they had just stumbled upon began to settle in. They had no idea yet how deeply this discovery would change their lives. But in that moment, as the shadows crept longer across the floor, Amanda knew something had just shifted. The days after the discovery passed in a blur. The treasures they had uncovered sat in the back of their cramped apartment, the crates now stacked against the wall like strange, silent giants. Amanda could barely process what they had found. It didn't feel real. Every time she looked at the items, those journals, the sleek prototypes, the encrypted drives, it felt like they were someone else's possessions, someone far more important than her and Jane. But it wasn't someone else's. It was theirs now. And it was time to figure out what that meant. Jane had been the first to call an expert. She'd found a tech consultant through a friend of a friend, someone who might be able to make sense of the strange gadgets and hard drives they'd found. Amanda remembered how her mother had hesitated before dialing the number, the weight of the decision hanging between them. What if they were making a mistake? What if these things were worth nothing? What if it was all just a wild, foolish gamble? But after days of sleepless nights, Jane had made the call. The man arrived at their apartment, his face hard to read as he surveyed the room, glancing at the crates like they were just another pile of junk. But then, his eyes stopped on the leather-bound journals, and something shifted. He walked over, picked one up, and opened it carefully. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp with curiosity. Amanda swallowed. I don't know. We found them in the warehouse." The man's eyebrows furrowed as he flipped through the pages, scanning the dense diagrams and the complex equations. This is research," he muttered, more to himself than to them. "This is the work of someone who knows exactly what they're doing." He set the journal down gently, his fingers brushing against the pages as if he were handling something fragile. "You have something rare here," he said, looking up at Amanda and Jane, his voice almost reverent. These could be worth a lot more than you think." Amanda felt a flicker of hope, but it was still so hard to believe. She looked at Jane, who was staring at the man, her face unreadable. "How much?" Jane's voice was quiet. But the question carried more weight than Amanda had expected. The man hesitated, as though he was weighing his words carefully. "I need to look at everything. Really go through it all, but if what I'm seeing is right, these prototypes, this research, it could be worth millions." He paused, looking at them both with an intensity that made Amanda's chest tighten. "You don't realize what you've found." Amanda looked at Jane. She could see the hesitation in her mother's eyes, the confusion, the fear. Jane had always been the one to keep their heads above water, to make sure they didn't drown in their circumstances. But this was something else, something bigger than both of them. Jane finally spoke, her voice shaky. "What do we do now?" The expert didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the crates and then back at Jane and Amanda. "You need to decide what to do with it, but be careful. You're sitting on a gold mine, and you need to figure out if you want to sell it, use it, or keep it for yourselves. Either way, you need legal help. You don't want to mess this up." Amanda felt a rush of dizziness. It was real. This wasn't just some lucky find. This was their ticket out, but the weight of it all pressed heavily on her chest. They could make the right choice and change everything, or they could mess it up and lose it all. Jane looked at Amanda, her eyes wide with disbelief. Amanda didn't know what to say, how to process it. She could only look at the crates in front of her, filled with things she didn't understand but knew were important. And for the first time in a long while, she thought maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. For the next few days, Amanda and Jane barely spoke. The apartment, once a quiet place of necessity, now felt heavy with the weight of the discovery. The crates, those strange boxes that had seemed like forgotten junk just a week ago, now sat in the corner, looming over them. Every time Amanda glanced at them, a knot tightened in her stomach. The thought of the $1,000,000 treasure they had stumbled upon, it should have felt like a dream. But the more she thought about it, the more it began to feel like a curse. Jane had been quiet too. She spent her days pacing around the apartment, occasionally calling people she trusted, lawyers, friends who might know what to do with the wealth they now held in their hands. Every decision felt monumental. Every move had consequences. The money, the research, the artifacts, could they really keep this? Could they use it for themselves, or was it selfish to do so? Amanda lay awake at night, the sound of her mother's soft breathing the only thing that kept her tethered to reality. The apartment had never felt so small. They had lived in cramped spaces before, but now it felt different. The walls closed in on her. "Mom?" Amanda asked one evening, unable to hold it in anymore. Jane had been staring at the pile of documents on the table for hours, her fingers tapping against the papers, the quiet tension in the room building like a storm waiting to break. "What is it, sweetie?" Jane's voice was strained, but she didn't look up. "I've been thinking about what we found," Amanda said carefully. "Do you think it's okay for us to keep it?" Jane's silence stretched out, making Amanda's heart race. Finally, Jane looked at her. Her eyes were filled with so many emotions: fear, regret, confusion. "I don't know, Amanda," she whispered. "I don't know what the right thing is. We could be set for life. We wouldn't have to worry anymore. But what if it's wrong?" Amanda finished for her. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it was the question that had been gnawing at her, the one she couldn't ignore. What if the treasure wasn't meant for them? What if it was a mistake to take what wasn't theirs? Jane sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as if trying to clear her thoughts. "It's not just money, Amanda. It's more than that. These are people's lives, their work. This stuff, this research, could change the world. I don't know if we have the right to keep it." Amanda felt the weight of her mother's words sink into her chest. They weren't just holding a pile of things, they were holding someone else's legacy, someone else's vision. What if the billionaire who had owned the warehouse had meant for the treasure to be found? Or was it all a mistake? A game of fate? "I think we should help people," Amanda said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. "We could give it away, Mom. Maybe we could help people like us, people who need it." Jane looked at her daughter, a mixture of sadness and pride crossing her face. "You're right, Amanda. I just don't know how to do that. How do we give it up when it's so easy to just keep it for ourselves?" Amanda took a deep breath, her heart pounding. Maybe it's not about keeping it, but about what we do with it. If it's meant to change something, then maybe we should change lives with it. Not ours, but others. What do you think? Jane's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She nodded slowly. Maybe that's the right thing. In that moment, Amanda understood. It wasn't about the treasure itself. It was about what they chose to do with it. The weight of the discovery hadn't just been a burden. It was a test of who they wanted to be, not just who they had been. And for the first time, Amanda believed they had the chance to be something greater than they ever thought possible. The days after the decision felt different, like the world had shifted just slightly. And Amanda and Jane were both stumbling to keep up. The weight of what they had chosen to do, use their newfound wealth to help others, had not lifted. Instead, it pressed harder against their chests, a constant reminder that with great opportunity came great responsibility. They had started planning, but it wasn't easy. They had no experience in giving back, no roadmap, no guide, just a burning desire to do something good, to use what they had, to fix the things they had always wished they could change. They began small, reaching out to local shelters, homeless outreach programs, anything that might connect them with those in need. Jane had started making calls, her voice cracking under the weight of each conversation, her mind filled with questions. Where should they begin? Who were they to even start something like this? Amanda watched her mother, watched her face tighten with each call, with each new layer of guilt that began to settle in. They had found this treasure, these rare items, this research, and now they were questioning how to handle it. Should they give it all away? Sell part of it? What was the right thing to do? The thought of selling everything and living a comfortable life had crossed both of their minds more than once. It had been the easier choice, the one that would let them breathe without guilt or fear. They could buy a new house, get everything they'd ever dreamed of, food, security, clothes that didn't have holes, a life that didn't feel like it was constantly slipping through their fingers. But the question lingered. Could they really turn their backs on the chance to help others? Could they live with the knowledge that they had kept so much when they had once had nothing? They sat together at the kitchen table, an old lamp casting a dim light over the papers scattered before them. Jane had made a list: shelters, children's homes, food banks, and Amanda's heart beat faster with every name she read aloud. It was all so much bigger than they had imagined. Could they really make a difference? Amanda turned to her mother, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Mom, we can't just keep all of this. We have to do something. I don't want to be the person who just takes everything and doesn't help anyone." Jane's hand shook as she reached for the list, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. She had never been the type to dream of grand things, but now, with the weight of the world shifting in her hands, she realized she couldn't let this opportunity slip by. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about doing something that mattered. "I'm scared," Jane whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if we fail? What if we can't make a real difference?" Amanda placed a hand on her mother's. "We'll figure it out. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to start, one step at a time." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jane smiled. It wasn't a smile of certainty, but one of tentative hope, like she was beginning to believe in something greater than just surviving. They were no longer just two people caught in a never-ending cycle of survival. They had a chance to change something, to give back, to break free from the past. They didn't know where this path would lead them or how it would unfold, but for the first time in a long time, Amanda felt something she hadn't dared to feel in years: hope. And that was a start. The idea had taken root slowly, like a seed planted in uncertain soil. At first, Amanda and Jane had talked about it quietly, between the moments of doubt and fear. They had their wealth now, their unexpected fortune, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what they could do with it, what they could change. They had decided to start small, just a space, a refuge for children who needed a place to call their own, a place to feel safe, to dream, to be something more than just another face in a crowd of invisible people. It was terrifying, that first step. Jane had worked tirelessly, poring over resources, looking for funding options, searching for local businesses who might be willing to help. They couldn't do it alone. They needed help, and they had no experience in running anything more than their own survival. But Jane didn't stop. Every morning, she made calls. Every afternoon, she met with people, social workers, legal advisors, anyone who might offer advice or direction. Amanda watched her mother, whose shoulders had once been weighed down with the burden of worry, now standing taller, more determined. She saw the spark in Jane's eyes when she talked about the center, the way her voice trembled with excitement. They were doing it. They were finally taking action. It took weeks, but they found a small, empty building just off the main street. The paint was peeling, and the floors were cracked in places, but it was theirs. They signed the lease with trembling hands, but for the first time in Amanda's memory, there was hope in the air. The community center would be a place for homeless children like Amanda, kids who had nowhere to go, no safe place to sleep, no warmth or food or love. The vision had grown from a few whispers in the dark to something concrete, something real. They started by gathering donations, blankets, clothes, toys, anything that could help the children who would come through their doors. Amanda spent hours organizing everything, sorting toys into bins and folding clothes until her fingers were sore. It was hard work, but it felt good. She knew it was a beginning, a start to something bigger than just them. And each time they received a donation, each time a local business offered to help, it felt like the world was finally turning in their favor. Opening day came faster than they expected. The doors were painted a soft blue, with a small sign hanging outside that read, "Hope House, a safe place for homeless children." Amanda stood in the doorway, nervous but excited, as Jane worked on the final touches inside. The air smelled of fresh paint, and the walls were lined with colorful posters and hand-drawn pictures from local schools. It was small, but it was enough. They had enough. The first child to walk through the door was a little boy, no older than 5, his eyes wide with uncertainty. He held his mother's hand tightly, but when he saw the toys, the books, and the warm blankets, a tiny smile flickered across his face. Amanda knelt down to greet him, her heart swelling with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was something deeper, something more powerful. "We're so happy you're here," Amanda said, her voice trembling a little. The boy's eyes brightened. "Is this where we live now?" he asked, and for a moment, Amanda thought about how she used to wonder the same thing, how she had hoped for someone to offer her that simple question. She smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "This is home now." As more children began to trickle in, Amanda and Jane found themselves filled with purpose, their past struggles now part of the foundation they were building. The weight of their past was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. They had something to give now, something real, and for the first time, Amanda knew with certainty that they had made the right choice. They were doing something good. For themselves, yes, but more importantly, for the children who needed it the most. The community center had become more than just a place for homeless children to sleep at night. It had blossomed into something else entirely. A sanctuary, a lifeline, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost. Amanda and Jane had poured everything they had into it, blood, sweat, and tears. But it wasn't just the physical work that had made it what it was. It was the heart they had invested in each and every child that walked through those doors. The work wasn't easy, and some days it felt overwhelming. But each time a new child arrived with a glimmer of hope in their eyes, Amanda felt that all the effort, all the sleepless nights was worth it. The center grew steadily, attracting more attention than they had ever expected. Local newspapers wrote about the work they were doing, shining a light on the challenges of homelessness and the impact the center was having on the community. At first, it was a trickle, a few families who needed a place to turn to. Then, it snowballed. Word spread, and soon, they were getting calls from parents and organizations asking how they could help, how they could contribute. Amanda and Jane had become something they hadn't been before, role models. They found themselves invited to speak at meetings, at schools, at community events. It was humbling and overwhelming all at once. Amanda had never imagined herself in the spotlight. She'd spent so many years hiding, unsure of who she was or where she belonged. But now, when she spoke to a room full of parents or community leaders, she did so with a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. Jane, too, had transformed. Her face, once lined with worry and exhaustion, was now full of determination and pride. Together, they were showing others that change was possible, that no matter how deep the struggle, there was always a way forward. One afternoon, as Amanda stood by the door greeting a new group of children, a woman came up to her, holding the hand of a little girl with bright, curious eyes. The woman's face was drawn, tired. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've given my daughter a place to be a kid again. I didn't know where to turn, but now I don't feel so lost." Amanda smiled, her throat tight with emotion. She had never imagined that her story, her family's story, could be a source of strength for others. But it was. Their journey, from the darkest of places to this light-filled room full of laughter and possibility, was now a symbol of hope. As the weeks passed, Amanda noticed something else. The families who came through the door didn't just receive help. They became part of something bigger, a community. They began to help one another, offering support, advice, and even a shoulder to cry on. The center had become a network, a web of kindness and compassion that reached beyond the walls they had built. Amanda and Jane had sparked a change, but it was the people they helped who were now carrying that change forward. Amanda realized, with a sense of awe, that this was the ripple effect they had been hoping for. It wasn't just their lives that had been transformed. It was the lives of everyone they touched. The work was far from over, but the impact was undeniable. And for the first time, Amanda felt like she had truly found her purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, surrounded by a community of people who believed that, together, they could create something better. The air was warmer than it had been in months. And as Amanda stood at the window of the community center, looking out over the street, she felt a deep sense of peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt still. Amanda had always been used to motion, always on the move, always thinking about what came next, never truly able to stop and take a breath. But now, as she watched the children running around the playground outside, the laughter filling the air, she felt like she was finally able to. This was it. This was what they had worked for. She turned around, glancing over at Jane, who was sitting at the table, sorting through a pile of paperwork. Jane had always been the steady one, the one who kept things together when everything seemed to be falling apart. But tonight, even Jane seemed to be more relaxed. The tightness that had once held her shoulders high, slowly fading away. "Can you believe it?" Amanda asked softly, her voice filled with wonder. Jane looked up, her eyes tired but full of warmth. "Sometimes it feels like a dream." Amanda smiled, her heart swelling. It did feel like a dream, but it was real. The center was thriving. They had helped so many families, so many children who had nowhere to go, and every day more people came in, seeking help, seeking hope. What had started as a wild idea had become something tangible, something that would last long after they were gone. But as Amanda looked back on everything they had accomplished, she realized something important. It wasn't just the center, the building, the treasure they had uncovered. It was the way they had chosen to use it. They had made decisions every day that had led them here. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about what they had done with the chance they'd been given. The choices they made. Those had shaped their journey, not the things they found. "We've come so far," Amanda murmured, almost to herself. "I never imagined we'd be here, Mom. I never thought it was possible." Jane leaned back in her chair, her face softening as she looked at her daughter. "Neither did I. But we did it, Amanda. We didn't just survive. We built something. We made a choice to help, even when we didn't have anything." Amanda nodded. The weight of those words settled in her chest. They had made a choice. They had chosen to be something more than just survivors. They had chosen to give back, to make the world a little better, a little kinder. And, in the end, that was what mattered. Not the treasures, not the wealth. What mattered was the legacy they were building, a legacy of kindness, of hope, and of second chances. The children outside were still laughing, their voices rising in the warm evening air. Amanda watched them for a moment, then turned to Jane. "This is our real treasure," she said quietly. This is what we were meant to do." Jane smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, it is." And as they stood together in the quiet of the center, Amanda knew that the true wealth wasn't in the things they had found. It was in the choices they had made, the choices that had led them here, the choices that would carry them forward long after the last crate had been opened. This was their legacy. This was their gift. And it was more than they could have ever dreamed.